All right. I think we're live. That was interesting. It took a little while to get popping here. Hello, hello. If you're here with me live, drop a comment. Let me know who's here with me live on this Warrior Wednesday before we jump straight into today's Wizard Wisdom Wednesday. I think we're gonna stick with that from Wizard Walt. Wizard Wisdom Wednesdays with Wizard Walt. it always was like Warrior Wednesday. But I guess it could also be Wizard Wednesday. Special wizard version. Lots of W's. I don't know what that's called when you have multiple dub names. But I'm gonna get started here in a moment. See if anyone else would like to join us live for a fun topic. Cool. I think we are pretty smooth here. Frame rate's good. Not too much lag over here from what I'm seeing. So yeah, I think we're pretty good. Cool. Well, I'm going to jump straight in. So, for those of you rewatching this live, I'm going to probably cut out the beginning part. Thank you for joining me live on this Wizard Wisdom Wednesday. My name is Walt. I'm the founder, lead designer, and master wizard at Infitnite, the fitness fantasy RPG experience where men and women are transforming their mind, their body, and their spirit by playing a fantasy role-playing game and combining that with health and fitness. So today's discussion is going to be all about what's going to be the best class for fat loss. So two things that I want to go over before I jump into this topic is number one, what is a class? So you may or may not be familiar with role-playing games, but a class is like an archetype or an identity inside of a game which has particular qualities, skills, and characteristics that make it unique as far as the gameplay style. So if you played games like World of Warcraft, Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, Final Fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, there's a number of different classes, right? And in Infinite, classes work very similarly. Inside Infinite, which is a fitness fantasy RPG, our classes are based around training styles. So basically, instead of just choosing a barbarian in an RPG like Diablo, right? The characteristics, the traits, and the skill sets are based around a particular training style, which in Infinite is bodybuilding. And I'm going to be breaking down each one of our classes, just in case you're new, when I'm going over the tier list of which class is going to be the best for aiding in the fat loss process. So That's classes, at least a brief overview if you're unfamiliar, um, or a refresher if you are, and in a unique way since it is different in Infinite. But one other topic I want to go over before we dive into the tier list is also fat loss. So, obviously, I just mentioned that our classes are based on training style. And when it comes to fat loss is primarily nutrition focused. So, nutrition is, as they say, for those of you who are trying to get abs, they say abs are made in the kitchen. That's pretty much true. It's not the complete story. It's not 100% true. Um, can you do that with just nutrition? Sure. But the training component is going to be essential when it comes to uh, the process of burning fat, as well as the amount of muscle that you have underneath your fat. Um, there's so many ways that people can lose a tremendous amount of body fat. Then once they get down to a lower body fat percentage to reveal the muscle, they're unsatisfied because they've either lost too much muscle during the fat loss process or just never had enough in the first place to actually build the ideal lean, strong physique for both men and women. So I want to premise this conversation by stating that majority of fat loss is nutrition based, which in Infinite we call that alchemy. So majority of the results are nutrition based. So why are we having this conversation about our classes, which is based on training? Well, training can aid in the fat loss process. And the conversation today is all about which class is going to aid you the best and which one's not going to really help out much when it comes to reducing your body fat percentage, increasing the amount of calorie burn, because in order to lose fat, you need to burn more than you're consuming. So there are certain training styles and ways of training that can help you burn more fat over time. So that's going to be the conversation we're going to be diving in today. I'm excited to dive deeper into it right now as I show you the tier list. Oh, that is not the tier list. We're live. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to move myself over here so you guys can see all the classes. And we could dive straight in. So I'm going to go at it from bottom to top. So I'm going to start from E rank and go up to S rank as far as the best class for fat loss. In Infinite, I want to be specific. This is in Infinite. This is not a one size fits all. You can't just take this information and be like, all right, I'm going to focus on this class here. But I'm going to be breaking down each one of the 8 classes inside Infinite. We have, starting from left to right here, we have the Barbarian. Then we have the Elf. Then we have the Dragon. Then the Dwarf. Then the Olympian. Then the Orc. The Rogue. And then the Spartan. So it's interesting. It's going to be a very interesting conversation because some of them are similar. Some of them might end up on the same rank or not. But I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to talk through it. I'm going to really kind of explain my reasoning as far as each one of these particular training styles. So from left to right, again, the Barbarian is bodybuilding focused. The Elf is basically agile physique focused. So they're basically focused on mobility, some body sculpting and building leanness and things like that, but not on the bodybuilding end. The Dragon is the ultimate athlete. They're the hybrid. They can move across all different types of training styles. The Dwarf is all about functional strength training. So basically being able to improve your strength to prevent pain, prevent injury, and to apply that strength to the real world movement, picking things up, going on hikes, moving your body. Then we have the gladiator, or actually the Olympian, previously called the gladiator. And the Olympian is sports performance and sports specific training. Then we have the orc, which is powerlifting focused, the rogue, which is calisthenics focused, and then the Spartan, which is metabolic conditioning. So I'll be, again, breaking down each one of these classes in the respective ranks. And I'm actually going to start first with the orc here. So the orc, the reason why I'm going to start off first with the orc, because again, I'm going up from bottom to top, is the orc is primarily powerlifting focused. So if I were to really kind of start off with the class that's going to be, I'd say, the most challenging to aid in the fat loss process is the orc. Here's why. So the powerlifting training style requires an enormous amount of strength, force production, and just overall power development inside the gym. And in order to train effectively with this training style, it's going to require a tremendous amount of energy. And when you're in a fat loss phase, you're basically reducing your energy. Obviously, you're restricting yourself via obviously eating less, right? Because in order to burn body fat, you have to burn more than you're consuming, correct? So a lot of the performance gains inside the gym as a power lifter requires a higher calorie intake, specifically a higher carbohydrate intake. And typically during a fat loss phase or a fat loss program, you are reducing the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating, at least over time, right? It's inevitable. You inevitably have to reduce your carbohydrates. And that's going to affect your performance as a power lifter. So as a power lifter, most power lifters don't go through a fat loss phase unless they're trying to make weight if they're a competitor to compete, right? But then, of course, powerlifters in the off season, which aren't trying to maximize their strength development and their power development in the off season, they might go through a fat loss phase in the off season, but they might start to incorporate other different types of training, which starts to move away from just the powerlifting focused orc. So all that being said, in my opinion, the orc class is just not positioned to support the nutritional requirements for fat loss. So that's why I rank it at around E, and I would even say it's possibly around D. And the reason why I want to move it up to D is because powerlifters, or just powerlifting in general, is going to build muscle. And this is going to be a continued theme throughout this tier list, because the more muscle you have, the more body fat you lose, simply because it takes more energy for your body to maintain that muscle from a calorie standpoint. So the more muscle you have, the easier it's going to be, because you're going to be burning more calories on a day-to-day basis. So that's why I don't put it dead last in E. There is some benefits of incorporating powerlifting training, like I said, for muscle development, but it's just not the best class to support the nutritional requirements for performance and the nutritional requirements for losing body fat. So I'm putting the orc at D rank. Next up, C or D, I'm going to start with the dwarf here. I'm going to put the dwarf at C rank. So the dwarf specializes in functional strength training, somewhat similar as the orc. So the orc is going to, again, specialize in powerlifting specifically. And powerlifting is primarily focusing on 3 compound movements: the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Functional strength training can range from a number of different exercises and movement patterns. So typically what we teach at Infinite when it comes to functional strength, because we do try to incorporate some type of functional strength in all of our classes, which is the squat. So push, pull, squat, hinge, and carry. So really trying to focus on each one of those particular areas and maximizing those areas. So the reason why I'm ranking it above the orc is because you get way more flexibility with going into unilateral positions. So basically, positions where you're focusing on one side of your body alone. You can increase the amount of repetitions because you're not training in the specifically for power. Yeah, you're training in strength. You're going to be going into the lower rep ranges, but you can have a little bit more freedom and flexibility to incorporate a lot of different exercises, and some of these exercises can actually increase the amount of calories that you're burning. So essentially, you're able to more efficiently maximize your time in the gym by simply just moving more. So as a dwarf, you're going to be moving more in the gym more than the powerlifter, because most powerlifters have to take an extended amount of rest time in between sets in order to, again, perform with maximum force and velocity in all of their training. So the functional strength training style for the dwarf class has a little bit of an edge over the powerlifter for, again, fat loss in particular. And again, this is primarily when it comes to calorie burn. It may not, calorie burn doesn't always equate to fat loss, but I premised that in the beginning for a reason. So I'm going to say C rank for dwarf class here. And also another add as well is you can also train more frequently as a dwarf compared to an orc. Simply because as an orc, you are training with heavy weight. And when you're doing that, it's going to take longer for you to recover, especially if your training intensity is very high. So, 80%, 70% and above, you're going to require a lot more rest in between training sessions and things like that. So as a functional strength, dwarf, you can basically separate your workouts a little bit more strategically, so you can actually increase the amount of times that you are working out, and which overall can mean more calorie burn, which can aid in the fat loss process. So that is the dwarf class. Now, next up, the dragon class. So if I were to place the dragon class, I'm going to say the dragon class is... I'm going to say dragon class is right below the dwarf. Possibly, I'm going to say right below the dwarf for a couple of reasons. So the big thing about the dragon class is that they're leveraging a number of different training styles. So they're leveraging pieces of all of these different classes. And that means taking the best and the worst of all of these classes. And that includes some of the qualities from the orc as well, which is powerlifting. And as you can see, powerlifting is at D rank. And just the fact that, the dwarf class is more focused and has a little bit more flexibility when it comes to the exercise selection, frequency, and things like that. It has a slight disadvantage when it comes to the orc, especially on those days when the dragon class is performing powerlifting movements, right? So if this conversation was about muscle gain, which I already covered and created a tier list, feel free to check it out. I'll link it below. If we're talking about muscle gain, that's a different story, but we're talking about fat loss. So just the fact that the dragon can incorporate some aspects of other classes that might not be efficient or effective for fat loss, that's why I'm going to kind of rank it slightly below the dwarf. Because again, adding a lot of variety isn't always great. It's going to require a lot more structure, and it's going to be a lot more difficult to basically focus on specific goals. which is why the dragon class is a very, very unique class, and it's typically for um, warriors who are experienced in training already, and experienced in uh, alchemy, as well as mental intellect as well when it comes to consistency and challenging their body. So uh, I'm going to rank the dragon class slightly below at C rank, but slightly below the dwarf, but above the orc, because the dragon class can incorporate a number of different, effective strategies and tactics when it comes to improving the fat loss process during training. And again, that is just increasing the amount of calorie burn. So that's the dragon class. Next up, I'm going to be going with the barbarians next, I believe. I'm going to place the barbarian at B. B for barbarian. The barbarian is the bodybuilding training style, and the one aspect of the barbarian class is that gives it an advantage over all these other classes is muscle isolation. When it comes to muscle isolation, I mentioned earlier, muscle is a huge factor when it comes to the fat loss process. If you're doing the fat loss process effectively, you want to reduce the amount of muscle loss during that process as much as possible. So, if you are starting your fat loss phase with more muscle and you're training as the barbarian class, you can focus a lot more on particular areas of your body. And sure, it might not actually burn more calories like maybe the other classes, like performing a compound movement with the orc or even some sort of movement with the dwarf and the dragon. However, you can actually train with more volume, which is your sets times your reps times how many times a week you're hitting that muscle group. And that's a huge advantage because, simply put, higher frequency, the more you train, the more you're going to burn. Plain and simple. So if the orc is only training 3 times a week, the dragon and the dwarf are only training 4 times a week, but the barbarian is training 5 times a week or more, plain and simple, they're going to be in a better position to burn more calories over time because they're training 5 times instead of 4 times, right? 5 is better than 4. And that's a huge factor, which I believe places the barbarian at B rank. And volume is important. I think frequency is important. But plain and simple, the recovery process is also important as well. So intensity is not as high as possibly these other classes, which means they are able to increase their frequency and they're able to maintain a higher performance over time because they're not destroying their body and increasing the required amount of rest and recovery in between sessions. Simply because they can target particular muscle groups that aren't sore, that aren't damaged, and things like that. So, huge advantage for the barbarian when it comes to fat loss. I mean, some of the best athletes when it comes to bodybuilding, I mean, some of the best physiques, I should say, come from bodybuilding for a reason. Is they're able to, again, build muscle and retain muscle and go through that fat loss process, leveraging their intellect skills, of course, for discipline and consistency to maintain their muscle when they are going through a fat loss phase. So they're able to maintain a high frequency, high volume, and maintain their nutrition so that they can recover in between sessions and, again, survive the fat loss process, which is can be strenuous depending on how much body fat you want to lose and your experience with losing body fat, which we call the mastery, which is why we call all this the fire mastery. So, to summarize, the barbarian rank B above the dwarf and the dragon simply because they just have a lot more flexibility when it comes to targeting particular muscle groups, managing higher volume, managing higher frequency, and also managing recovery in between sessions much, much better. Next up, I'm going to go with the ELF. So if I were to choose, I believe the ELF is going to go... Let's place the ELF next to the Barbarian, and the reason why is the ELF is somewhat similar to the Barbarian. However, the ELF is not necessarily focusing as much on aesthetics. The big reason why a Barbarian has an upper hand on the ELF is the aesthetics component to it. And the ELF class is about mobility, more about mobility and movement rather than aesthetics. The ELF class is mainly focusing on body composition. Building a lean, agile, strong physique, and it's not necessarily about building muscle throughout your whole entire body, like the Barbarian. So there's a slight disadvantage when it comes to leveraging muscle as a way to burn more calories, right? Because the ELF is just naturally wants to be a lean, agile, and mobile warrior. So that's a huge factor when it comes to the overall fat loss aiding process through training. Now, mobility and movement is a factor, and that's why I place it above the dwarf and the dragon, is because, simply put, the elf just loves controlling and moving their body, doing mobility training, possibly doing a lot more cardiovascular training as well, because movement is not just moving with exercise, it's just generally moving your body. So the elf definitely is in a better position to incorporate more cardiovascular training and conditioning type training. And of course, the barbarian does that as well. So that's why I believe the elf is not quite above the barbarian, but I believe they're both on the same level. And that's a big component that the dwarf, the dragon, and the orc don't really have. Is, can you incorporate cardio and conditioning? Yes, every class should. But is it really more emphasized in those particular classes? Not necessarily. So the elf class incorporates more of that type of training, and that's just one reason why the elf is above the dwarf and the dragon and ranked at B, in my opinion. But other than that, we got 3 classes left. Who's gonna take the top spot? Nobody knows. But up next, I'm going to go with the rogue here. Now, I want to break down the rogue because this is actually a tricky one, because the rogue is calisthenics based. And you might be thinking, well, that's just a whole bunch of bodyweight training. You're not really doing a lot of resistance training, right? Like the other classes. Why is it above the barbarian? Well, that's a good question. Big advantage that the calisthenics training style in the rogue class has is the fact that you are performing a large number of repetitions. So plain and simple, when you're lifting weights in the gym, you can basically lift it a limited amount of times, right? You're not going to be able to do 30 reps, 40, 50 reps if you're using a heavy enough weight. With calisthenics, however, you're basically mastering your body weight, which means in order to progress in calisthenics, you're going to have to do more repetitions, right? Or add resistance to that. But generally, calisthenics training requires higher repetitions. So you're performing your pull-ups, your push-ups, squats for more reps, which means that's more movement, right? So technically, if we were to just isolate calorie burn in a workout, typically you can burn more by just doing a high amount of repetitions, because plain and simple, the more you move your body, the more you're going to burn, right? So if you look at the rogue class and someone who's training as the barbarian or even the elf, you'll probably notice that most people who do train calisthenics are just naturally leaner. Most people, simply because requires a high amount of repetition, body control, and it is basically challenging gravity, right? And the more you move your body, the more calories you burn. So ultimately, that's going to be the biggest advantage, and that's why it puts the rogue in its own category at rank A above the barbarian and the elf, in my opinion. Plus, the calisthenics train style can also incorporate a number of different conditioning training, like hiking, traveling, going to parks and walking around, and a lot of movement is involved in the rogue class and the calisthenics training style. So that's why I place it at rank A for improving the fat loss process. Then we have two more classes. I'm going to place the Olympian at S tier. So, big reason why the Olympian's at S tier is it's very sports specific. And if you've trained in any sport, it doesn't matter what sport that is. It could be badminton, it could be cricket, it could be ping pong, whatever you see in the Olympics. It's going to require very specific types of training for a high amount of frequency. You're going to be moving your body more in a lot of unique ways. And just overall, regardless of what you choose as a primary sport, it's going to require some sort of athleticism. And that's a huge, huge curveball when it comes to all these other different types of classes, is that this is the athletics class, which can incorporate some of the most calorie hungry exercises like plyometrics, swimming, so many different movements with different velocities, for different amounts of time, and sometimes with higher amounts of frequency. Some athletes are training multiple times a day, and you just can't do that training as the orc, training as the barbarian. I mean, you can on a higher level, but generally when it comes to the fat loss process, you're way more primed to maximize your calorie burn in your training by focusing on more athletics type training and sports performance type training. So it's S tier. It's S tier. Obviously, the type of sport is a huge factor, right? For example, in 2024, we got, competitive gaming as a sport. Is that going to be an effective sport to practice for fat loss? Of course not, right? So it really is sport specific, but it's just the potential of maximizing the calorie burn for fat loss is the highest amongst, compared to all of these other classes with the Olympian. The Olympian is S tier when it comes to overall calorie burn. So I'm putting that at S rank. And we got one more. We got the Spartan. And if I were to rank the Spartan, I think Spartan is S tier. And I also think Spartan is above the Olympian. Now, big reason why I believe the Spartan is above the Olympian is plain and simple, it's just the specific training style, which is metabolic conditioning. And this training style incorporates a, a number of different full body compound movements. It incorporates resistance training. It incorporates conditioning in your cardiovascular system throughout the whole entire training process. So with sports specific training, you might go through bursts or what they call as intervals, um, simply because you're focusing on performance when you're training for a sport. With the Spartan class and metabolic conditioning, this is a whole entire training style that's just purely based on maximizing your endurance, your strength, your power, and your conditioning. And that training style is just primed to, again, burn tons of calories the whole entire training process. So for the moment you start your workout to the moment you're ending, you're burning tons of calories. Now here's also the curveball. Intensity is a huge factor. This is arguably one of the highest intensity types of training. Think of this style of training as similar to CrossFit type training, which is very intense, incorporates heavy resistance training, requires a great level of conditioning, and you're burning tons of calories the whole entire time. But when your intensity is at a high level, even after your training session is done, you have something called EPOC, which is excess post oxygen consumption, which, plain and simple, your heart rate is elevated even after your training, which means you're burning more calories even after your training. Is it a significant amount compared to all these other training styles? Not necessarily. Again, majority of fat loss is nutrition. We're talking about the 5 to 10%. And if we're trying to push as close as possible to that 10%, the Spartan takes the crown, hands down. The training is just more intense. There's less rest periods. You can mess with all different types of training styles, or should I say exercise options when it comes to full body type training, full body exercises, because that's the number one way to maximize your calorie burn is just use more muscles and move your body more, right? And you can handle a lot more frequency because some workouts can be shorter duration compared to, for example, a barbarian or even a calisthenics. When you're doing dozens and dozens, if not sometimes hundreds of reps in your calisthenics workout, you know, the Spartan can hit 100 reps and complete their workout in less than 30 minutes. And that's a huge advantage of increasing the intensity but reducing the duration. So Spartan takes it above the Olympian and all the other classes at S rank. So all that being said, when it comes to the class tier list for the Fire Mastery, which focuses on fat loss, we have the Spartan and the Olympian taking the S rank spot. Definitely nothing beating them when it comes to, again, maximizing fat loss. Then we got the Rogue at A rank, and then the Barbarian and Elf at B rank, the Dwarf and the Dragon class at C rank, and then the Orc at D rank. Again, your class is primarily focused on training style. Your mastery is primarily driven via nutrition. So I can't stress this enough. It doesn't matter which class you choose. Sure, there might be classes clearly that are better than others when I'm positioning you for the best for maximizing your fat loss gains. However, majority of your progress is nutrition. So regardless of your class, you can burn body fat. And it really is just comes down to your training level, how quickly you want to make progress, as well as a number of different factors when it comes to your skill levels in particular areas for each one of these particular classes. So, for example, if you've never done powerlifting before, um, the orc class is going to be very difficult, which can make the fat loss process more difficult for you because now you're focusing less on the parts or the areas that are going to help you focus on the fat loss process much better than others. But if you're familiar with training like in the bodybuilding training style, now you get to take that energy, that time, that effort and put that towards the area that's going to matter the most, which is going to be nutritional alchemy. So regardless of what class you choose, you can lose body fat using all of them. That's why none of them is E rank or below. Um, these are all effective paths, and at Infinite, we have a number of different uh, programs that and avatars that leverage all of these classes for our fire mastery, which is fat loss. So regardless of what class you choose, there is a path forward when it comes to getting the right program on the right level for you and improving in your training while focusing on your overall fitness goal of fat loss. So all that being said, that's my tier list breakdown. And if you want to experience what it's like to embody and train like these classes and adopt the spirit of each one of these classes on a day-to-day basis to transform your body, your mind, and other aspects of your life, then feel free to come join us at Infinite and play the fitness fantasy RPG version of health and fitness, because there's no better, more fun, more engaging, more interactive, and just overall fun way to experience health and fitness than to approach it like a role-playing game. And you can do that by heading over to infiniterpg.com. That's INFITNITE RPG.com. Feel free to join Bronze tier for free, which can unlock access to our Infinite website. Check out our 3 realms, which is the Dungeon, the Academy, and the Sanctum, which is our game modes. There's a number of different experiences you can go on and have at Infinite, which makes Infinite something so unique and very special for each individual who's looking for particular things in their health and fitness journey. So check us out, dive in, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below or feel free to reach out via email. We have support options on our website. And yeah, if you want to lose body fat, then choose the class that's going to be the one that's going to allow you to stick to it the most. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this tier list breakdown, is that whatever class challenges you at the right level that you enjoy is going to be the best class for fat loss. Plain and simple. If you're doing something that's too difficult, it's just you're just eventually going to stop, and then all that progress you've made is just going to go out the window. So choose a class that you like, choose a class that you think is fun, and just the right amount of challenge for you. But with all that being said, this is Master Wizard Walt, founder, lead designer, and your guide by your side on your adventure through Infinite. And I'll see y'all next Warrior Wednesday for another Wizard Wisdom Wednesday. Thanks for joining me live, for those of you here with me live. And I'll see y'all next week. Conquer the day.